It was Christmas Eve in 1991, when 23-year-old Dana Ireland set out for what should have been a peaceful bike ride along the scenic roads of the Big Island of Hawaii. She had moved there just months before, eager to start a new chapter in her life. Dana was the kind of person who lit up a room, adventurous, full of energy, and deeply loved by her family. That holiday season, she was spending time with her parents and her older sister, Sandy. It was supposed to be a time of joy, but by nightfall, Dana would become the victim of one of Hawaii's most notorious crimes, one that would later lead to a devastating miscarriage of justice. At approximately 5 p.m., Dana set out on her sister's bicycle, pedaling along a quiet stretch of road near Kapaho Bay. She was headed toward a friend's house, not far from where her family was staying, but something went terribly wrong. When she didn't return, her family grew concerned. Hours later, a passerby discovered Dana's bicycle lying in the dirt on a remote road. The scene was haunting. Her bike was mangled, as if it had been struck by a vehicle. Scattered nearby were a single white sneaker, a broken watch, and strands of Dana's long blonde hair. But there was no sign of Dana herself. It wasn't until an hour later, nearly 5 miles away, that a woman named Ida Smith heard something. Faint cries for help coming from the bushes near an isolated fishing trail. She followed the sound and found Dana, barely clinging to life. She was barely clothed, covered in dirt and blood, and had suffered catastrophic injuries. The ambulance took over an hour to arrive. She was rushed to the hospital, but her injuries were too severe. By Christmas morning, Dana Ireland was dead. The crime rocked the island. This wasn't the kind of place where something like this happened. The people of Hawaii, deeply rooted in community and trust, couldn't comprehend such brutality. Police were under enormous pressure to solve the case quickly. They needed to give the community an answer. Within weeks, investigators focused on 3 local men: Ian Schweitzer, his younger brother Sean, and their friend Frank Pauline Jr. The 3 had no history of violent crime, but Pauline, who had a reputation as a troublemaker, had already been on the police's radar. When police brought him in for questioning, he initially denied involvement. But after hours of pressure and promises of leniency, he cracked, giving police a story, one that implicated the Schweitzer brothers. Pauline's confession was riddled with inconsistencies. At first, he claimed he had been present during the attack, but hadn't participated. Then his story changed. In some versions, he said Ian was the ringleader. In others, he pointed to Sean. The timeline didn't add up, and the details contradicted the physical evidence. But police were determined to close the case, and Pauline's statements were all they needed. By the time the case went to trial, the prosecution leaned heavily on forensic evidence, specifically bite mark analysis. An expert claimed that marks found on Dana's body matched Ian Schweitzer's teeth. This kind of forensic evidence was widely accepted at the time, but years later, it would be debunked as junk science. There was no DNA evidence linking any of the 3 men to the crime. The tire tracks found at the scene did not match Ian's vehicle. The prosecution's case was flimsy at best, yet all 3 men were convicted. Ian received a life sentence without parole. Sean, facing the same fate, took a plea deal, admitting guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence. Frank Pauline was also sentenced to life. For more than 23 years, Ian Schweitzer sat in prison, steadfastly maintaining his innocence. His family never gave up fighting for him. His legal team continued to appeal his case, hoping for new evidence that could prove what they had known all along. He was not the man responsible for Dana Ireland's death. In 2022, that evidence finally came. The Hawaii Innocence Project, working alongside the New York-based Innocence Project, secured DNA testing on key pieces of evidence from the crime scene, most notably a T-shirt found near Dana's body. The results were shocking. The DNA did not belong to Ian Schweitzer, Sean Schweitzer, or Frank Pauline. It belonged to an unidentified male. Further investigation revealed even more damning evidence. The bite mark analysis that had helped convict Ian was thoroughly discredited. Forensic experts testified that the methods used in the original trial were unreliable and should never have been used as evidence. Additionally, the tire tracks once believed to match Ian's car were re-examined and found to be inconsistent with his vehicle. With this overwhelming new evidence, Ian's case was reopened. In early 2023, a judge vacated his conviction. After more than 2 decades behind bars for a crime he did not commit, Ian walked out of prison, a free man. The moment was bittersweet. His life had been stolen from him. His name had been dragged through the mud. But finally, he had his freedom. But one question remained. If Ian, Sean, and Frank didn't kill Dana, who did? For decades, the DNA sample recovered from the crime scene remained unidentified. Investigators had no matches in the criminal database. The real killer had left his mark, but had remained completely unknown, until advancements in forensic technology finally caught up with him. In July 2024, the answer finally came. Through genealogical DNA testing, a breakthrough that had solved numerous cold cases in recent years, investigators identified the real killer, a man who had never even been a suspect. His DNA was an exact match to the sample found at the crime scene. He had lived freely for over 30 years while innocent men suffered behind bars. For Ian Schweitzer, freedom was bittersweet. He had lost nearly half his life to a justice system that had failed him. His family had suffered immensely. His brother Sean had taken a plea deal for a crime he never committed, and Frank Pauline had died in prison before the truth came out. Dana's family was also devastated. They had believed for years that justice had been served, only to learn that the real killer had remained at large. Their grief, which had never faded, was compounded by the knowledge that the investigation had been botched from the beginning. The case of Dana Ireland is a tragic example of how wrongful convictions destroy lives, not just the lives of those accused, but the victims and their families as well. A rushed investigation, flawed forensic science, and coerced confessions led to a decades-long injustice. It took years of fighting, advances in forensic science, and sheer perseverance to undo the mistakes that had been made. Dana Ireland should have lived. She should have celebrated Christmas with her family that year. She should have had a future full of possibilities. And the men accused of her murder should never have spent years behind bars for something they did not do. Now, justice has finally arrived, but at an unimaginable cost.